Give it just a second.
All right. Oh, look at that. Webinar is now streaming live on Facebook. Uh-oh. Did Pastor Nicholas freeze, or you just, uh-oh.
Is it freezing?
Yeah.
All right, let me go. I'm going to go to the sanctuary. They have a stronger signal, so just give me a minute. The signal's much stronger in this sanctuary.
All right, yeah, and the participant number keeps clicking up, so now if we start at 10:03, that's fine.
All right, just give me a minute. Set up downstairs.
Folks, we're taking a minute and we're getting a little walking tour of Lincoln United Methodist Church, courtesy of Pastor Nicholas, corner of Maston and Main Street in Buffalo, New York.
Yes.
That's
Yes. It's like a Spike Lee movie, right? That's his signature thing, right? People walking around.
that movement, it moves through the thing. Yep.
Yeah.
That's my Morehouse brother.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
I'll be
Live webinars, ladies and gentlemen.
20 seconds. I'll be
Real life happening.
That's right.
Yep.
Look at that. We get some stained glass window in the background, the vaulted ceiling.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's
Organ
gonna be
pipes.
great.
Oregon, yes.
It's gonna be great. I'm
That's
telling
great. It is worth the wait.
you. Yep. There you go.
All right.
How's
Thanks so
that?
much.
All
Yeah.
right.
And thank you all for your patience. We're glad to have you. This is the second in a series of webinars. I think every time we do this, we spring it on the panelists that it's a series. So we have to keep getting you back. But we're delighted to have you here. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves in a moment when I turn it over. But I just want to kind of catch up on where we were after the last conversation. So the first, a couple of weeks ago, we had the same panelists talking about racism. And it was really a nice blend of some stories, some research, some data, and I think the personal stories really resonated. And I think a lot of what you talked about and shared really highlighted the fact that, racism is pervasive. A lot of people, I mean, that's news to a lot of people, let's be honest. It's pervasive, it's present. Sometimes people don't mean to be racist and they are. And it's really embedded in structures, systems, and policies. And we're kind of advancing the conversation now. And one of the things we want to do is recognize that those structures, those systems, and those policies serve people, right? They were created for the benefit of people. And let's be frank, they were created for the benefit of white people. And white people have it as their duty to change those policies because they benefit us. And frankly, we're the people in a position of power to change those processes, those systems, those structures. So one of the things that we've been doing, and at Population Health Collaborative, we've been doing a lot of reading. And one of the things I've been reading is called White Fragility. And I think Dr. Underwood at the last webinar we did, you suggested that as recommended reading. And it's really about whiteness. And we talk about the African American and Blackness and that, but what we really need to understand more is how our whiteness impacts society. And these conversations are real, and by real sometimes I mean uncomfortable. But I just want to read real quick from this is again from White Fragility. But rather retreat in the face of that discomfort, we can practice building our stamina for the critical examination of white identity, a necessary antidote to white fragility. So again, it's important for us to understand how these structures, where these structures came from, how they perpetuate white privilege, and what we need to do to dismantle them. And part of it, so just a real quick anecdote. Another passage from White Fragility talks about Jackie Robinson. I think this is interesting because it puts white privilege and white racism and structural racism into perspective. We like to talk about Jackie Robinson as the first Black man to play Major League Baseball, and it just feels like such a warm, cozy story when we frame it that way. But one person said, that's true, but another way to understand it is that Jackie Robinson was the first Black man that whites allowed to play Major League Baseball, which is entirely true. It's a little less comfortable, it's a little less cozy, but it puts the history of structural racism front and center. So again, think about that. The first Black man that whites allowed to play Major League Baseball. And I think framing whiteness, framing racism from that perspective is a helpful perspective and one we need to adopt. So I'm going to turn over to the panelists. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves and then kind of, have you each kind of talk about some of the conceptions that white people have or misconceptions have around racism and structural racism. The idea here is for you to help us hold up a mirror to understand how whiteness and racism perpetuates itself. We don't want you to try to teach us what it's like to be African American. We want you to help us understand more fully how whiteness and racism impact society. So one of the things that we hear often is, people will say something like, "I'm not a racist." What's the problem? Why do we still have a problem if I personally am not a racist? Most of my friends are not racist. Not understanding, really missing the point. And I see Kelly and Dr. Underwood smiling already. So I am going to turn it over just so we don't get confused. Let's go in order. We'll go with Kelly, Dr. Underwood, and then Pastor Nicholas, and we'll start the conversation. So thanks.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for logging in and joining this conversation. I am Kelly Marie Wofford. I am a native of Buffalo, New York. I created the organization Front Seat Life to primarily address mental health in communities of color. And when you consider racism and its impact on an individual's health, mental health is directly involved in that equation. So I will leave that there with regard to introductions. I am also a member of the Buffalo Center for Health Equity and African American Health Equity Task Force. Dr. Underwood?
Willie Underwood. I'm a urologist by training, also has a master's in public health and master's in anatomy cell biology, fellowship trained in health services research. I'm also a member of the Buffalo Community Health Equity Center and also the African American Health Equity Task Force. I'm the co-founder of CAPS Biotechnology. We have a prostate cancer biomarker that we're validating and sit on the board of the AMA, sit on the board of Health Now on the board of the Population Health Collaborative, and also as recently as of yesterday, learned that effective January 1st, I'll be on the board of the Joint Commission, and they're the ones who basically certify all the hospitals in the United States, which should be very fun. All right, that's it. Thanks. And welcome everyone. Let's have fun, right? Let's learn a little bit. Let's help each other.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Dr. Underwood, and congratulations. I mean, I hope people recognize and understand that, the significance of what an asset that is for this community to have an African-American physician, not only on the national board of AMA, but now on the board of the Joint Commission, which should have a real positive impact on health outcomes for Black folks here in this region. My name is Pastor George Nicholas. I'm senior pastor of Lincoln Memorial Church, located at 641 Maston, where our mission is changing lives through love. I'm on a number of boards and agencies. I'm one of the conveners of the African American Health Equity Task Force and the Buffalo Center for Health Equity. I'm also on the board of Population Health Collaborative and a number of other things in the community. But I'm just really grounded and committed to urban ministry, liberation gospel, liberation theology, social gospel, gospel of inclusion. So thank you for logging in, and let's have a conversation.
So let's start with that original, kind of proposition. And again, a couple of you kind of smiled at it. When people say, "I'm not racist, my friends aren't racist," talk a little bit about the difference between maybe some personal racism and structural racism, and how you see that.
Well, it's the biggest misconception I believe right now is that racism is an issue of emotion, right? You can be a kind, loving, wonderful person and still be a racist, right? Your friends and family can go to you for anything. You're always there to give. Your spouse may be Black or African American. that doesn't mean that you are, one, not racist, or two, that you don't benefit from the racist, from structural racism, right? The other part to that, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Underwood and Pastor George, is the fact that we all have privilege, right? We all benefit in some way, right? So this isn't negating anyone's struggle. This isn't, meant to be demeaning or demoralizing. We're having a truthful conversation, and truthful conversations are often difficult. We're all parents, and we know that the first conversation about sex, puberty, most people are like, oh my God, I don't want to have that conversation. Knowing full and well, most people have sex, right? So if we are uncomfortable talking about something that happens in most every home, I would think that it's okay for you to also be very uncomfortable talking about a subject that is taboo. Racism is something we don't want to address. So I just want that to kind of sit with people as we move on in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So a story comes to mind. So, started medical school at SUNY Upstate. And when we got there, it was quite hostile. We had a big meeting doing orientation, and my classmates said, you're here, you're taking a seat away from qualified, educated, hard-working white students. So when you looked at my class, out of 110 of us, what you saw was this. You saw 5 white students who had gone to Lemoyne College, and Lemoyne College had a relationship with SUNY Upstate, whereas they had a panel, and if the panel put your name on the list, SUNY Upstate accepted you, and you never had to take the MCAT, Medical College Admissions Test. Never took the test, but yet they're telling me that my scores were inferior to theirs. They never took the test. You had another 10 students who were accepted because their parents were physicians at SUNY Upstate. Currently were physicians. They were accepted, okay? You had another 15 students who were accepted because the alumni got them interviews and got them in, right? But the lonely few 6 Black students were taking seats away from qualified, educated, hardworking white students, and they never saw a problem with the other students. That was okay. And I'm going, well, I don't understand, right? That's not affirmative action, right? But not only that, affirmative action is a policy that says you have to have a fair, equitable policy. It doesn't say you have to have X number of people in your seats and this, that, and the other. But check this out. In the 1970s, when they said that we needed more Black students in medical school because we need more Black doctors, they increased the number of seats in the medical schools to account for the increased number of Blacks. So it wasn't that I was sitting in a white guy's seat, the white guys were sitting in my seats, right? Based upon that. So, it's like crazy, right? So that is sort of, and the way we think about things and see things and put things in perspective without having the knowledge piece of understanding that goes behind it, of course, it makes sense. Of course, dude, you cheated to get here. You're dumb and stupid. Now, I rationalize the way you're doing better than me because you must be cheating, which they did that too.
So, first of all, the concept of race doesn't even exist, right? This is something, this was a creation that out of a sense of developing white supremacy. So when you look at, world history, the Europeans, they made war against each other from wherever, like go back, look at the Game of Thrones, right? They make shows out of that stuff. And then when the Europeans, began to explore different parts of the world, and they found that there were people of other colors or other hues or other ethnicities, the French and the Dutch and the Spaniards and the British, when they looked at the indigenous people, or they looked at the African people, or looked at the Asian persons, whatever, they looked at each other and said, we're white. And therein begins this kind of journey of creating this concept of race, which is not a scientific concept. It's something, a social construct that was developed in order to provide some intellectual rationale around white supremacy, right? And so this whole notion, the whole notion of the explorers, pioneers, Lewis and Clark, all this other stuff, was really, a sense of the Europeans going and conquering and taking land that didn't belong to them, and then going and capturing for the story of the North America, capturing African people and bringing them in here to labor for free on the indigenous people's land, right? And so there had to be some kind of rationale for this, right? Because at every level that's morally wrong. And so they create this concept of white supremacy, and then they undergird it with a theology, of the theology of discovery or manifest destiny, or the provincial thing, how even the story about how America was just like this divinely inspired activity, and what have you. And so developing this notion of superiority of those with white pigmentation versus those who have a pigmentation that is not white. And then so out of that birthed this thing called, here, and then, every document, everything that was developed from the Declaration of Independence through the Constitution was all designed to perpetuate and undergird and support the ideology of white supremacy, right? Even when you talk about the notion of the 3/5 of a man. And so even when the signers and the writers of these documents, who even many of them own people, human beings, but still would have the audacity to declare that all men are created equal, when in their own practice, they weren't doing that. And so from time and on, and so every institution, so when every institution, whether it be banking, whether it be medical, whether it be educational, whether it be whatever institution that was developed here in America, was always developed with the undergirding or the underpinning of white supremacy, right? And so there creates this notion of called racism, which is a systemic thing, which is an exercise of power, right? And so the difference would be, I can be very prejudiced, against a white person, right? But my prejudice against that white person will not deny that person. I don't have the power to deny that person a mortgage. I don't have the power to deny that person educational opportunity. I don't have the power to sentence their children and a whole community in underperforming schools. Only thing I can do is just let my prejudice fester within my own spirit and diminish my ability to enjoy the human family. The system of white supremacy bursts racism, which is a system. It's a system. So every system, every institution in America is infected with racism. And so what has happened over time, and I'll stop here, is that individuals will speak of their own personal behavior, right? So a white person will say, I am not a racist. That may be very, very true in terms of their own personal behavior. But there's still, that does not deny the reality that the system that we operate in America is a system that is racist, and it promotes white supremacy. I even say that with my church, the United Methodist Church is a church that is completely infected with the ideology of white supremacy through its theology, through its practice, through its promotion of clergy, through every level, right? Does that mean every white person in the United Methodist Church is racist? No, but the system there is that we function in is, and so that's the real. I think that's the real hurdle that we have to overcome. Is this notion of white people defending a system that is indefensible, but then also want to hold to their own personal beliefs that they don't hold within their heart, but yet don't want to admit or recognize the system in which they function in does not have that same belief, right? And so that's how I would kind of describe that. Maybe a longer answer than you wanted, but I think it's important to make those distinctions.
It's a perfect answer, and that plays out in the individual's interactions, right?
Right.
And what we see, how we judge certain things, right? How we explain certain things in our minds and in our hearts, right? So one child says a comment and the class laughs, and the teacher says, "Oh, Johnny, that was funny," right? Okay, let's get back to work. Another child says something that was never meant to be a joke, but it was very true. Like, why does Father Marquette have a sword? Well, the reason he has a sword and a Bible and a cross, because he told the natives of this land, take this Bible or I will kill you. Mm-hmm. True statement.
Yes.
That individual is told to leave, to get on the bus because they were on a field trip, taken back to school. Mother works 45 minutes away. They got to come pick him up and take him home because he is a menace in the school. A menace, called a menace, right? That 9-year-old was me. What I'm saying, a menace, okay? And you're like, and of course, as a child, you're like, I'm a menace? Like, what does that mean, right? So it's that two interactions, the exact same thing, but how they're viewed, that's where how these things are played out. Now, was that teacher, if you set her down, she could be the nicest woman on the face of the earth. She probably loved her kids and loved her family. And if she had a black neighbor, she probably loved them too. I invite them over. I like their little kids. My cat is named Blackie. You know, right? I mean, you know, all that fine and dandy, right? But at the same time, she's actually perpetuating a system of destruction, because when she looks at one student, she sees potential, and when she looks at the other, she sees a menace.
Mm-hmm. Implicitly, right? Without thought.
Correct.
That is her subconscious at work, which is fed by society, right? So we all have implicit bias. When you see somebody, if I tell you, oh, I met this person and their name is Kelly, your first thought is going to be it's a woman, unless you know a man named Kelly, right? If you go to the mechanic, you know, oh, I'm going to drop my car off to Jerry the mechanic, you're going to assume that Jerry the mechanic is a man. All of that's implicit bias. The same is true. You know, oh, Shaniqua's resume says she has a master's degree. Well, you know, she probably was an EOP student and didn't have to work that hard. You know, they let them in, you know, just to fill a quota, right? So then there's nothing on that resume says that. Nothing in history says that. The rules don't say that. Administration policies don't, right? But that's the thought process. So we have to be aware that all of us have these unconscious processes that immediately will cast judgment on someone. And that casting of the judgment can really be life or death.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on that and what you said, because Dr. Underwood, when you talked about your story, that people said to you who took a chair of a more deserving white person in med school. I think that, and I don't know if it's good or not, but I think we've reached a stage where in polite society, most people wouldn't say that, right? So you had 110 people in your class, you said, probably very, very few people would actually say that now, but I wonder how many of those people would actually think it. Well,
I would push back on that. I would push back on that.
But how many people would think it? Okay, good. Go ahead.
Because, I mean, you know, one of the things, and you know, I know we're not going to be political, but it's beyond politics at this point. One of you talk about action steps people can take, especially in the white community, is one of the most significant, important things to do at this point is to make sure Donald Trump does not get reelected as president of this country. And it has nothing to do with policies. This man, when he took office he had a man named Steve Bannon and Steve Miller as his advisors. Those two men are unapologetic white supremacists. They might as well wear Klan robes and brown shirts, right? And for them to have Steve Bannon and Steve Miller in the White House advising the President of the United States is just like them saying when we're saying to Dr. Underwood, you don't belong here.
Correct.
The whole candidacy and the movement around this man is all about reestablishing white male rule, not governance, white male rule in this country. And I think we need to be very clear about it. I think that the media has normalized race, openly, blatantly racist behavior and rhetoric out of this man. Just this week, the President of the United States, not just some guy, the President of the United States of America, who is elected to represent each and every American, retweeted a video where someone was saying white power on that.
Right.
That was done intentionally.
Right.
It was not done accidentally.
Correct.
Right? And the root goes all the way back to Steve Bannon and Steve Miller, who Steve Miller is still in the White House.
Right.
So there can be really no serious conversation about white allyship with whites who want to ignore the fact that we have an unapologetic, unrepentant white supremacist in the White House with people advising him who run media companies and stuff that promote white supremacist ideology and propaganda and are advising him. So I think we need to be really clear about this stuff and stop talking about, well, we're not supposed to be political. Why not? I mean, whatever is perpetuating and whatever is giving strength and energy to a white supremacist system, right? We need to be able to talk about those things if we're really serious about changing them. Now, if we're not serious about changing them and we just want to appear to be liberal and progressive, but don't really want to dig deep into the root, the system, of what's going on in this country and has gone on, then, that's a different conversation.
Correct.
Well, and to that point, there are well-meaning, kind-hearted, loving liberals that are racist and uphold the racist system in which we live in, right? It's two wings of the same bird. The system works the way it's built. So a part of this is, if this hurts your feelings, if this angers you, the question is, ask yourself why, right? Because it shouldn't be an issue of, oh my God, that they're calling me a racist or they're just trying to make me feel bad. This isn't about you and your feelings, right? It's not about me and my feelings. We're talking about institutional racism, which is void of feeling and emotion. You just have to look at the facts and look at how they layer up. If we are talking about giving people an advantage due to, whatever that advantage is, but we're talking about racism. So white men receiving the advantage based upon policies, rules, and laws, that means someone has to receive a disadvantage.
Correct.
So if it's hurting your feelings, if it's not making sense, that's good, because that means the words are resonating.
And so, and what's so interesting is is even how the conversation kind of, when you think about it logically, that even when we start talking about equality, there'll be others who would think like we're doing something to somebody else by advocating for equality. So be clear, when we talk about these issues, we're not talking about putting Black people in a position of dominance. What we're saying is, let's create a space around so that we have an equitable system at every level, not at just some things, that every part of the fabric of the United States of America has to be one that embraces the notion of the equality of all human beings, and that no system should be designed or to perpetuate a system where some people have an advantage and others a disadvantage by the basis of their ethnicity or their skin pigmentation. Why is that controversial? That's what's so baffling to me.
Well, and part of it is a thought that those individuals have nothing to contribute anyway. And that sort of is what racism has done to the minds of America, right? So when you are running, when you are an employer, and you see candidates, and you see a white guy who has a criminal record and a Black guy who doesn't, and you say, well, I'm going to hire the white guy who has a criminal record over a Black guy that doesn't, okay? And you justify that as that, you know, he's paid his time. He's done his time. He's trying to provide for his family, right? And all these justifications. And then when, then you say, well, wait a minute. What? Hold up. That makes no sense whatsoever. But that plays out in ways where people who have talents and skills who can contribute greatly to this country. For example, we don't know if those 2 million Black men they put skills in them that would have solved our complex problem of garbage, of the environment, or whatever, right? We don't know what was in them that was never developed, never created, never allowed to participate in society, right? Because in them is Jared Morgan, who created the traffic light and the gas mask that in World War II and World War I saved millions of white people's lives, right? We don't know if it's Charles Metzer who created the process to mass produce shoes. We don't know any of that, right? But no one sees that. No one asks that question. Well, what are we missing when we deny opportunities to a population that's 44 million strong in this country? Could our health system be better if someone else was in charge? Maybe. We don't know, because we'll never find out. Because if they're Black, there's no way there'll be a CEO of any of these hospitals in this region. And the question is, why not?
Right. And that goes back to the representing of the race, right? If a Black person comes in, they're hired, they don't do well, that, as we all say, has set the people back, right? But the way it plays out in the office is, well, we hired one, it didn't work out, so let's just go on back to business as usual. But we don't do that any other time. If a white person is late for work and they're late for work and they're late for work, and you talk to them about it, you write them up, and you finally have to let them go, right? You don't say we're not hiring any more white people.
Correct.
But we do that with Black and brown folks. The same thing with women. When we look at the equal pay movement, the equal pay movement is equal pay for white women.
Right.
Because in that agenda, it does not say we want to raise the pay of all women so that we are all paid the same. And then, because Black and brown women make less than white women, and then all women should be paid the same as white men, right? When we look at even the Black Lives Matter movement, we fight and are pushing for Black lives, and so now we're talking about intersectionality, but we don't have the same vigor and fight when it comes to Black women, right? So there's layers and pieces. Even when we started our introductions, and this is how society works in programming people, that just is psychology. But I didn't talk about the boards I'm on, my degrees. I didn't talk about initiatives that I've started. I didn't talk about being on UB's steering committee for the New Health Equity Institute. I didn't talk about, because as a woman, and I'm saying this because this also applies to race, because as a woman, women are programmed to not promote themselves, right? We're programmed to just be, work hard, do everything you need to do. And the same thing is true for African Americans. Listen, work hard, keep your head down, work twice as hard, be twice as smart, be twice as everything, just so that you can keep your job, not so that you can stand out and be promoted or receive a raise or accolades or anything else. It's all about keeping the status quo. So when we, again, thinking about implicit bias and racism and how it works, I'm using those examples so that people can turn around and look at your situation. I don't know how your brain works or what your specific biases are, but by revealing these pieces, you can now turn and look at your life and say, oh, wow, yeah, we haven't hired another Black person since so-and-so left. Yeah. Or, our C-suite has no minorities in it. Why is that? You mean to tell me no one else is qualified besides a group of usually white men? Yeah. Right? So when we look at all of these issues, we need to make sure we're having a holistic conversation. We're not even talking about ability, physical ability. We are not talking about gender issues. We're not talking about any other isms or issues outside of racism. So when you pile all of that on, it can be overwhelming and daunting. But you take one thing, you work on it, you focus on it. We're talking about racism. Let's focus on that thing.
And Kelly, I'd like to go back to implicit bias a little bit, and it's interesting. So, and Pastor Nichols, I really appreciate it when I said that, in polite society, people wouldn't say the sorts of things to Dr. Underwood that he heard years ago. First of all, I don't necessarily consider the president as being in polite society, but it is interesting that I don't know what I don't know, and it's interesting to hear that it's not that shocking for people to say things like that now. I would just assume because of the circles I travel in, that none of the people I know or I'm friends with would say something that overtly racist. But I do know, growing up as a kid, we were taught and in schools to be colorblind, right? That's the phrase they use, and right? So we were taught, and I still hear to this day, I'm colorblind. I don't see black or white. And again, in White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo makes the point that frankly, those of us who pretend to be colorblind are a big part of the problem, because we're not, and there's science that proves we're not. So I think the problem is really pervasive, and it's a little bit trickier because there are well-meaning people who aren't necessarily well-informed, and to some extent we might be self-delusional. So I guess I'd like to hear from you, this whole concept of, people need to be colorblind and only see good and bad, not black and white.
Well, so the problem is a lot of times people have, when they think about this notion of race and racism, they look at it from a binary context, right? In terms of, a racist is bad, a non-racist is good. And what you have to look at in a context of a system, right? The system exists, right? And we all struggle with things that the system has fed us. So as a straight male, right? I was programmed by all of our surroundings to be sexist and homophobic. So I had to make an intentional effort in my own thinking to disengage from that level of thinking and to be more inclusive and accepting, and I don't use the word, I hate to use the word accepting, but celebrating each and every human being, regardless of their gender, and regardless of who they're in love with. And so if I don't look at a person, if I see Kelly and I don't see Kelly as a woman, then I'm not seeing Kelly.
Correct.
Right. And so the question is, you see the person for all that God has made them to be, but then you don't discount them or diminish them based on what you see, right? And then when a white person tells us that they're colorblind, they're dismissing, the struggles, the journey, the things that we have to deal with as it relates to institutional racism, and they're imposing their worldview upon us, which is an act of white supremacy.
Right.
Well said. I mean, it's impossible, right, to not see the individual. I have these conversations with my daughter all the time, who's 12, and I'll say something, and she says, "Well, that's ageism." And I said, "You know what? It's absolutely correct. It is, right? It is. I'm 55. You're 12. Okay, right? And there is a power dynamic that goes on in that interaction because I'm father. I control this house. I control all the resources in this house. I control the food that comes in, the heat, the air, the whether or not you can breathe in this house, I control, right? But if I want her to develop into a total human being, I have to create an environment that allows her to grow, to express herself, to develop, to write all these sort of things. That is uncomfortable to me, right? Because at certain times I say, "You're a child, sit down, I'm the father," right? That's what comes out of me inside. But I don't say that because if I say that, then I cut her off, right? So I said, I got to acknowledge that you might not think like a 12-year-old, right? What you're saying may actually be a 30-year-old thought, right? What you saw may be something that's unique to your generation that I could never see and experience. So let me learn from you, right? So while she's growing, I'm growing, right? I'm a better man because I got a child in my house that develops my ideas, that challenges the ideas that I was taught when I was her age about women, about sexuality, about homophobia, okay, right? All these sort of things. She challenges that. Now, what if I wasn't open to it, right? Like what most people aren't open to us when we say, that's not it right. They go, "Well, Willie, you just, and even if it's not about me, if it's about someone else, well, you're just too sensitive, and that person is a good person, and they're not a racist person, and they're not." And you say, well, rather they're racist or not, the outcome's the same, right? It doesn't matter if they meant to do it or didn't mean to do it. It was intentional or unintentional. The outcome is the same, right? How they discipline people is the same, right? Who they hire, fire, promotes, the same. The culture of the environment's the same. Not how it's interpreted is the same. So whether you're a white supremacist or you're a kind non-white supremacist, but you don't see color, and the reason you don't see color because there's no Black people for you to see.
That's true. Yeah.
And challenge your social circles, you know what I mean? And I go back to the church, man, for those who are followers of Jesus Christ, and I'm unapologetic about that. How many Black people in your church?
And
and
are you listening and cultivating that discipleship with that group of people, right? Not just attending the church, but are you hearing them? Because Black folks are leaving predominantly white churches in droves because their needs aren't being met. The churches have not developed the anti-racist stance.
Right.
It's like, we'll just come on Sunday and praise and worship, give your tithes and offering, and pray on it, right?
And I think yeah.
We
And it's
can't live like that.
right.
Go ahead.
And no, go ahead. It's just amazing that how even in our own spirituality that we practice, exclusion and segregation, and how many I mentioned it last time, if you're white, think about joining a church with a Black leadership. It might enlighten you, it might help you to come to a different understanding, a theological understanding, a perspective. When I preach, my life experiences come into my preaching, right? You can't deny your journey and how you deliver the word of God, and it helps people to find a different understanding. One of the things that helped me is listening to female preachers. It helps me understand the depth and the struggle and the pain that patriarchy and misogyny and gender bias has inflicted upon people. That is
Right.
not just a little minor inconvenience, but it's a diminishing of a person's humanity. And that's what racism does. It diminishes the humanity
Correct.
of a person. And that's very serious. It's not something that, and I hope, John, we get to the point where, because we only have about 12 minutes to talk about things that we've done. Here's the thing that I need people to stop doing. Stop with the symbolism.
Yeah.
Stop it. Stop with painting streets. Stop with changing pancake boxes. Stop it already. That's not the answer. I have this thing about the NBA now, talking about, they're going to paint on the sidelines of the thing, Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. Really? And that's gonna keep who alive?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a substitute. It's a substitute. Now, if the symbolism is part of a larger, comprehensive strategy, then it's fine. But symbolism in itself, we better be careful, because pretty soon, it'll be, you'll have Black Lives Matter and a swoosh, or a Black Lives Matter and an Apple sign, right? And it'll be marketed, and it'll be a clever little phrase, but then the real work won't get done.
Well, you used a phrase earlier, and I want to come back to it real quickly. Intentional effort, and that's what we need, because we've had a lot of symbolism, we've had a lot of I guess showing things, but and I think of intentional effort. I used to work with kids in school, Black kids in school, and they'd go to predominantly white schools. And I'd hear the faculty members say all the time, how come all the Black kids sit together at lunch? And my response was, well, all the white kids are sitting together too, but and I never said anything, but from now on, I will say something. And not only will I say something, it's like, let's get some white kids to go join the Black kids, because the Black kids aren't going to kick them out, right? I mean, recognizing that things are happening is not the same as recognizing opportunities to change them. And let's not have these segregated lunchrooms where all the Black kids are sitting together and all the white kids and everything else. We need to make that intentional effort that you refer to, Pastor Nicholas, to start to change these things. And whether it's correcting Uncle Charlie at the 4th of July picnic when he says something stupid and offensive, whatever it is. But I think that intentional effort is what people are looking for, and what are the sorts of things that we need to do in our day-to-day lives to try to make a difference, it's not just window dressing, that's really pretty meaningful. So I'd like you guys to pick it up from there.
Well, you mentioned the lunch table, and I wanted to kind of hone in on that, because it's not just have one Black kid at each lunch table so that they're not sitting together, right? It is creating an environment that is comfortable for all people to eat together, right? So it is, because dispersing the table has that color blindness. We don't see color. They're sitting everywhere. But we have to look at our teachers and their education and their bias. We have to look at the administration, their education and their bias.
Right.
The rules and laws that govern education, right? The funding that governs education. All of these things trickle down to Black kids sitting together at the table.
Correct.
So it is more than just dispersing, similar to health disparities. If we take all the Black people on the East Side and sprinkle them out over Western New York, they're still going to die 10 years before their white counterparts, because we're not addressing the root cause. We're not addressing the actual issue. So it's not just moving, pieces on the chess table around. It is actually addressing the issues that cause the symptoms that we're all talking about.
Correct. And that's important, because let's look at it from a disease perspective. If we have the option of treating hypertension or curing hypertension, we would prefer to cure it, where no one needs to take medications or anything like that. Moving the deck chairs around is literally moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic, right? Because our ship is sinking. So we have to say, wait a minute, not that they're sitting together. Why? Are they sitting together because that's the only time within this day that they feel that they're comfortable, that they feel that they can share their ideas and thoughts and feel validated, right? So the truth of the matter is, when you said that, John, I flashed back to medical school when my white colleagues would come sit with us and bring their venom to my table. And they couldn't understand when they sat down and said, do you mind if I sit here? And I would say, yes, I do. I'm mine. I'm at peace. And now you're going to come here and talk about, Blacks are stupid and you're all here on affirmative action and I don't understand. I hear you cheating, Willie, that's why. You're going to, come on, man. And I'm supposed to just say, sit next to me? No, please, sit over there. Don't sit next to me. So it's not just bringing people together. As Kelly said, is bringing a culture and environment where we value one another. And until that's happened, I tell I would say who you need to sit with so that you can rejuvenate yourself to finish the second day of the school day, right? And whoever that is, I don't really care, but I need you to go the second half of the day and kick butt the way you did in the first half of the day. Okay, right? So that's sort of it. And it's the same thing in the work environment, right? Going to work kills Black people. Kills Black people. Mm-hmm. The stress of having to deal with it, right? And I'm going to tell you how that plays out. So that's why we need whites in the work environment to say, what the heck is going on, right? How do we do business? Why don't we don't have a critical mass? We got a city of 40% Black. Well, let's look at the hospitals, right? The majority of the Black people in the hospitals are mopping the floors, right? Mopping the floors, taking out the garbage, emptying out the bedpans, and cooking the food. You look at the nurses, you have few Black nurses. They're probably, if they are 0.3%, I would be surprised, right? Look at the nurse managers. You can count the number of Black nurse managers between all the hospitals on one hand. Physical therapists, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, right? You can't even count them on one hand. That's on all the hospitals, right? And no one says, what the heck is going on? Look at their leadership, right? So what are we missing out on, right? Without having that thought, the ideas, the concepts. And then you look at those employees who none of them could work from home, who makes a wage that is not conducive with being able to provide for their families, to have a vehicle, to have food, to have a life, but yet we're applauding them. Come here, we're gonna give you mass, we're gonna let you die, we're gonna underpay you in the first place, and then we're gonna blame you for having disproportionate deaths in your community. What's wrong with you Black people? Don't you know how to social distance? We heard that at first, right? Until we start saying, no, that doesn't make any sense. Let's look at the data. Let's look at this, right? So those are all the things that come out. Those are all racist ideas and thoughts, right? So until we get to the bottom of that, the rest of it, now, you know, I may like to watch a football game and see Black Lives Matter because I'm hoping that maybe it's going into the subconscious mind of the fans, right? Maybe, right? And they won't tell one of the Black athletes who says, you know, I'm not going to stand doing this rendition here, right, of a song, and that you don't say, what's wrong with you? Aren't you selfish and greedy? You should be happy that you're making all that money. Stand your butt up, right?
And so then the picture kind of emerges when we go back to implicit bias and we talk about what can be done, how it can be done. We often hear, well, what about Oprah? What about Michael Jordan? What about this famous Black person? What about this rich Black person, right? What about them? Because we don't say, well, what about Brad Pitt? And what about George Clooney? And what about, I don't, Larry Bird? I mean, there are so many white people with resources that are rich and famous and wealthy and right? We should not be in a place where we have to pick out people to justify a racist system. Right. And that's where we are. How do we make that change? When you look at the work we did, the four of us, and the rest of the task force and the Buffalo Center for Health Equity, when we look at the work that we did when it came to COVID, it was creeping in, and we were all like, okay, Black folks are going to be dying. Right. We have to do something. What do? We looked at the social determinants of health. We said exactly everything that you're saying, Willie, right? People living in the same house, don't have the resources, can't social distance, have to ride the bus, can't get to testing sites, don't have PPE, right? Are not aware, they don't believe it's real because we don't have leadership actually saying that this is a real thing that we should be knowledgeable and wise about and careful, right? So when it comes to how do you make the change, what do? It's pausing, it's reading, it's researching, it is understanding where the experts are. It's having those tough conversations. If we all didn't get together at that table, the 15, 20 of us, and have real open conversations about race, real open conversations about implicit bias and prejudice, we would have never been in the position 3 months ago to address COVID, right? So it has to start somewhere. We all have to start and say, listen, I don't know what I don't know, and it is what it is. How can we move forward? What do I need to learn? What do I need to know? That's where the accountability piece comes in. We can make this change. We collectively, not we, the four of us, we.
And I like what you said about learning, because it's interesting. So I've been corrected twice so far. We're almost done, so I probably get, but a couple of things, and which is great. You know, I mean that's what we need, because not that I speak for every white person, but a lot, you know, as a liberal, you know, progressive person who thinks I kind of get this, obviously I don't. And you know, most people, I would venture to say almost all white people who pretend to get it, pretend to understand it, pretend to know what to do, we don't. And so we need to have these difficult conversations. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a place to start. It's not the place to finish, but it's a good place to start. This has been good. We're getting, you know, nice comments from people, which is great. We obviously need to continue this. I'm going to leave it on this note and maybe set up the next one, because I get, and Pastor Nicholas, we've been in a lot of meetings where white people have this look of frustration, like, what do we do? You know, we want to be helpful, and we literally do not know what that looks like. So that's an honest kind of personal reflection, and I know I speak for a lot of people when I say that. I don't think it's fair to ask all of you to tell us what to do, because these are the systems and the processes that we've built to benefit ourselves. So this is a long conversation. We'll continue it. Dr. Underwood, you look like you're dying to get in with something. We've got just some.
No. I'm trying to respond to someone who sent a chat message that we don't have time to talk about.
Yeah.
There's a book, So You Want to Talk About Race. I don't know if you were able to see it on the screen.
Yeah, it's a great book. I just finished reading that. So one of the things, John, I think we can do is, and we'll work with this, is let's put together a bibliography. and share it with everybody. And I'll send some books, and everybody else will send some books. One of my concerns, 10 seconds, with the Beverly D'Angelo book is, and I've read about her work. She's done great work, but it's really interesting that a white woman has the #1 selling book on New York Times on about race.
Yeah.
And a lot of her work, there's a lot of Black scholars who have been doing some fantastic things. I'm not begrudging her of the work, but her work is good. It's very good, but it's not the standard of the conversation around race. And so, but that even at that, it's so ingrained in our system. It's just, it's everywhere. So I want us to develop a bibliography of some scholars who have been working on these things. And I think it's great. And hopefully at some point we can bring some of them into Buffalo and have a robust conversation with them.
Yes.
And
That
we
has to
shared
be our
that a couple of weeks ago, and we're continuing to push that out. So this has been terrific. Again, uncomfortable, but in a productive way. Love you all. It's great stuff. I'm glad we're having this conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll continue this. I'm going to encourage everybody to continue to check our Facebook page, or particularly for other resources, the bibliography, and we'll keep this alive. So thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day.
Awesome.
Peace and
Thank
love.
you. Have a great
Bye-bye.
day. Thank you. Bye-bye.